Happy Sunday, everyone. If you remember in Matthew, or in our case, Joseph Smith's inspired version of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 4, Jesus is talking to a bunch of people. He goes, separates himself. He's sitting on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples approach him privately. And so this comes in verse 4, and they say, "Tell us when these things will be which thou hast said concerning the destruction of the temple and the Jews, and what's the sign of thy coming, the end of the world, the destruction of the wicked." And so they're basically saying, like, you've been talking a lot about these future events. Tell us when that's going to happen. And so you may remember, of course, he says it will come in a day in which there are false Christs and false prophets and all of this deception, right? And then in verses 22 and 23, it says, "For in those days there shall also arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if possible they shall deceive the very elect, who are the elect according to the covenant. But I speak these things unto you for the elect's sake. And you shall also hear of wars and rumors of wars." So I want to talk today about what in the world that means, because young Connor, growing up, going to seminary and all the things, I had perhaps naively understood rumors of wars to be just what it sounds like. The rumors of wars. There's, hey, this war might break out. Hey, these two countries might fight. Hey, did you hear that, the minister of parliament here or the secretary of defense did that or said that thing? And so I had always just lumped those two together. Wars and rumors of wars. It's either the war or people are talking about the war that's about to happen. And so basically I had understood it to be just a prediction of future wars and calamities. But I was missing what I think is a very important element that I now believe is the actual meaning behind rumors of wars. And that's what I want to talk about today. Of course, this term appears in a variety of scriptures. For example, in his vision of his posterity in the future, Nephi beheld wars and rumors of wars. That's in 1 Nephi 12:2. He beheld wars and rumors of wars. He later had another vision. This is chapter 14, verse 16. And he likewise beheld that there were wars and rumors of wars among all the nations and kindreds of the earth. It's in 2 Nephi 25, Mormon 8, D&C, and there's all these references to wars and rumors of war. Now, I'm going to give you the answer kind of up front, and then we'll unpack it. And I think I already did. Because when you read, especially how Nephi talks about it, when he says that he beheld wars and rumors of war, I don't think that you can behold, in other words, you can't see a rumor. You can't see someone just passing along something to someone else. I think it's something different, something that can be beheld. So then we turn to our trusty Webster's dictionary, 1828 dictionary, to again understand the usage of the term, at least during the time of the restoration of the gospel, if not the centuries prior when the King James Version was translated, and to try and understand what does it mean, a rumor of war. Interestingly, I flipped through a whole bunch of different editions of the Bible looking at Matthew, where Jesus says wars and rumors of war. And many of the modern translations of the Bible call it wars and reports of wars. So going back to like the King James or the Geneva Bible before that, which has a fun history. The reason we have a King James Bible is because King James didn't really like the Geneva Bible. And in the Geneva Bible, there were scribes who had put comments about praising instances in which people defied the king, and King James didn't like to see that there was this religious blessing for Christians to defy authority, and so he authorized and funded a new Bible. So the Geneva Bible, which was insanely popular at the time, quickly went out of vogue because it was crowded out by the King James Bible. Nonetheless, fun little history lesson aside, the Geneva Bible, the King James Bible, all the early Bibles, they say rumors of war. They don't say reports of war. They say rumors of war. Okay, so here is the Webster's 1828 definition of rumor. There's two. Number one, a flying or popular report, a current story passing from one person to another, without any known authority for the truth of it. Number two, a report of a fact, a story well authorized. So what rumors relating to war are a story passing from one person to another that's considered a report of a fact and claimed to be well authorized? I think, therefore, in our modern vernacular, a rumor of war is propaganda. It is war propaganda. Lies that are creatively designed to appear truthful, to elicit feelings of anger and vengeance, to justify retaliation in the minds of those who hear the rumor because they feel like they're an aggrieved party or someone attacked them. And of course, the Book of Mormon especially is full of examples of these so-called rumors of war, which you might say are more institutionalized efforts by those in power to whip up the citizenry into going to war by amplifying a threat, either a perceived threat or a real threat, making everyone scared, encouraging them to take up arms and go fight the identified hobgoblin, the bad guy. Of course, the classic example is Amalickiah. This is like to the T what Amalickiah does. He's newly crowned as king of the Lamanites as a result of deception. There's a whole story there, of course. And then it says in Alma 48, it says Amalickiah, quote, began to inspire the hearts of the Lamanites against the people of Nephi. Yea, he did appoint men to speak unto the Lamanites from their towers against the Nephites. So in a very literal sense, Amalickiah is building a propaganda apparatus through which he can convey ideas to the unsuspecting masses who are deceived into feeling emotions based on what they're told that lead them to want to go to war. They are incited to go to war. Of course, this has its intended conflict that I'll read. I'll read really quick. This is in verse 3. It says that Amalickiah had hardened the hearts of the Lamanites and blinded their minds and stirred them up to anger, insomuch that he had gathered together a numerous host to go to battle against the Nephites. Okay? He had hardened their hearts, blinded their minds, stirred them up to anger. That is the formula of a rumor of war. Okay, so there's this book called Von Krieg. It was written by this Prussian military general. I'm going to quote a brief part of this. Hugh Nibley once called this the what did he call it? The Bible of the military for 150 years. Very famous. In English, it's just called On War. It was written after the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s. It's one of the most important treatises on like Sun Tzu and the Art of War, right? Like this is kind of an equivalent of that, right? Just strategic thinking, military dynamics, and all the rest. Very influential book. And here's what this book says about war. In the great combats, which we call wars, there is usually no historical feeling of individual against individual. In other words, the people don't hate one another. National hatred becomes a more or less powerful substitute for personal hostility of individuals. So, in other words, there is no personal hostility of individuals in different countries, so national hatred, this tribalistic warring of clans, if you will, becomes a substitute where the individuals themselves have no quarrel with one another. He continues, where this is also absent, in other words, the national hatred, he says, a hostile feeling is kindled by the combat itself. An act of violence will excite in us the desire to retaliate and be avenged. So he says, if people don't hate one another, maybe there will be national enmity that causes them to battle one another. And if you don't have that, then there just needs to be an attack to incite those feelings that get them to want to go attack. So here's what Hugh Nibley says about this. He says, this is the circle. Amalickiah has to get the Lamanites to hate so that they can go to war. So he has his people preach from the towers, gets the propaganda machine going. Such hatred, Hugh Nibley says, is artificial. It has to be stirred up. But once the killing starts, there follows the idea of vengeance. The good guy sees his friends bullied, so he seeks vengeance. The theme of almost all TV shows, so many on World War I and II, etc., revenge is the whole thing. That's from Hugh Nibley. So I think War propaganda can be beheld. When Nephi beheld wars and rumors of war, I believe that propaganda can be beheld. It saturates every form of media. It's in print, digital, verbal, it's in movies, and like it's everywhere in our media. You can behold the war propaganda. It's all over pop culture. And, the leaders today, just like Amalickiah, are promoting their deceptions from a variety of these modern day towers. Many of these towers we have in our home, in our pocket. We allow ourselves to be preached at and stirred up to anger by giving a platform to those in power who use these means to achieve their desired ends. And of course, the rumor, right? It's a report of a fact provided by government officials who are well authorized, according to Webster's dictionary. So this comes from official sources, and it doesn't have to just be war, mind you. Anything stirring up the hearts of men to anger and contention and all the rest. I would argue COVID is a perfect example. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Hey, unselfish people who don't get vaccinated, you're going to kill grandma, and all these things. There were a lot of examples that came in there where people were very combative one against another. And there was a lot of anger and a lot of claims of harm being done and feeling vindicated and harming others as a result. So this doesn't have to be, I think, just actual war conflict. But I want to ask this question. Why does this happen? Why do rumors of war or propaganda exist? Well, for that, I believe we want to go to chapter 43 of Alma, back to Amalickiah. This is verse 8. For behold, his designs, his intent, his designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites. This he did, so he's stirring up the Lamanites' anger against the Nephites. This he did that he might usurp great power over them. His own people, well, his newly adopted people that he's ruling, right? That he might usurp great power over them, the Lamanites, and also that he might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them into bondage. That's a bonus. If you can get victory over the enemy, yay! However, the primary purpose, what was first mentioned here, his designs were to usurp great power over these people. The primary motive of propaganda, of rumors of war, is not to go fight wars. It's to acquire control and power over your own people, to consolidate more, to scare them into saying, please save us, please, spare us from this threat. And the government, like Leviathan, if you're familiar with our Tuttle Twins Leviathan Crisis book, or the book ours was inspired by, Crisis and Leviathan, how government inevitably grows and grows and grows as people get scared and demand more and more safety. I want to give a quick shout out to John, who a couple months ago pointed this out, this Alma 43 verse 8, in a YouTube comment on another video I did about, or musing I did about war. What was funny is I went back to a blog post I had written about rumors of war a decade ago, 2013, and 10 years earlier, I believe it's that same John, a commenter named John, shared that same analysis on this particular verse. I thought that was fun. So, John, if you're out there, you've been a dedicated and loyal reader and listener, I guess, saying the same thing 10 years apart. And I thought that was a perfect analysis. This is ultimately what we see propaganda doing in our day. It is the consolidation of political power by those who do this. And what I want to emphasize here is that Christians have to completely reject this. Christianity itself is in total conflict with this Amalickiah type strategy. So this comes from 3 Nephi 11, when Jesus is here in the Americas, whether you believe he was in the Midwest or down in Guatemala or whatever, whatever, who knows? That's a fun topic for another day. I have mixed feelings about that. But he was here, he was talking to these people, and in 3 Nephi 11, verses 29 and 30, here's what he says. He that hath the spirit of contention is not of me, but is of the devil, who is the father of contention, and he stirreth up the hearts of men to contend with anger, one with another. Behold, this is not my doctrine, to stir up the hearts of men with anger, one against another, But this is my doctrine, that such things should be done away. War propaganda is unchristian. It is anti-God. It is undoctrinal. It is apostate. However you want to say it. It is wrong. And Christ here is saying that because the purpose of this propaganda is to stir up people's hearts to anger, harden their hearts, blind their minds, remember? It says Malachi did that. He hardened their hearts, he blinded their minds, and he stirred them up to anger. And Christ is saying, do away with all of that. None of that is of me. That is all the devil. And we see that proliferating the political process today, all over the historical record, that this stuff, this type of rumors of war is happening. And of course, you can include in this all the false flags. I mean, the example I love to share, and there's many, is when the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military, the top military brass, went to the President of the United States and offered an official proposal to kill people, blame it on the Cubans wrongly, right? Because it wasn't, but all with an intent to deceive the American public into wanting to go to a war. This is during all the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything. The American public was not supportive of military intervention. The military leaders wanted to intervene, but they needed the public to demand it. And so they literally proposed to the President of the United States to kill Americans, to bomb Miami, to shoot down boats and rafts of exiles fleeing communist Cuba and everything, to kill these people, to deceive the public into thinking that it was, Cuban nationals who had done this, so that Americans would be pissed off and demand, again, vengeance, right? How dare they? An American was killed. Let's go to war. Again and again and again, we fall into this trap. We're doing it now with Ukraine in a lot of ways. Okay, so you go to the Nazis. The Hermann Göring was the lead of the Gestapo for a while, and at the Nuremberg trials, he's in prison. He's being interviewed by this kind of psychologist, and they kind of get chatty, and that psychologist interviewer later kind of writes down all the things that he heard from Göring. Really interesting stuff. Among them is this quote. He's from his jail cell during all the Nuremberg trials. He says, "Of course, the people don't want war. Why would some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best that he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war. But voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That's easy," he says. "All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same," he says, "in any country." I don't know that he was wrong, right? This is a formula for, again, political control, using propaganda to stoke anger and contention and vengeance, and by extension, empower those people or encourage them to attack their peers for their traitorous activities if they don't similarly become whipped up to anger and demand fighting. For all the people who say, "I don't think we should intervene in Cuba," by the way, that story about Cuba I mentioned earlier, it's called Operation Northwoods, and the only reason it didn't happen is because JFK, the president at the time, personally shot it down and rejected the plan. But had it happened, had that been authorized, likely the files would not have been declassified. And for decades, American kids going to school would have read in their history books about the grave injustices of the communists in Cuba that killed all these poor people and how great our military is for, intervening and all the things, right? And that would have been what people had learned and been taught as truth when it was completely false. And to this day, had it happened, we may never have known the truth because maybe they probably would not have declassified that and publicly admitted it. But now the document is declassified and you can see for yourself. So these are the rumors of war, and they happen over and over again. The sad thing, like when I wrote a book, 2014, called Feardom, How Politicians Exploit Your Emotions and What You Can Do to Stop Them. And that book, being written in about 2013, 2014, talked heavily, not exclusively, but heavily about post 9/11 America. and how people have traded away their freedom for supposed security because of the alleged threats of, terrorists and so forth. And of course, they shared stories from decades past, but it was very focused on post 9/11. And I was kind of bummed when the book was published because I realized that what I was talking about was cyclical. It was not this one and done thing that'll be in the historical record and we'll all learn from it and look back on it and say, oh, how could we have gone along with that and believed them, right? I realized, having written the book and seen all these cyclical actions throughout history where people were duped by the rumors of wars, and of course throughout the scriptures where it happens as well. So it's like the entire world record testifies that humans are easily deceived by their political leaders into going to war, into demanding conflict against someone against whom they have no personal ill will. But they're told by those in power that those people did that bad thing. I mean, one of the stories I share in Feardom was during the Gulf War, and Saddam Hussein and Iraq and Iran, and they're all kind of squabbling, and the military starts going in, and Kuwait, right, is kind of being attacked by Iraq. They're trying to annex it or whatever. There's all this conflict between Iraq and Kuwait. So Congress, they have this subcommittee of whatever, and they hold this hearing to try and hear about what's going on. And there's this young girl there named Naira from Kuwait. And she testifies to all these congressmen that she was present in a Kuwaiti hospital when she saw Iraqi soldiers come in, take babies out of the NICU, out of their little incubator machines, keeping them warm and healthy, take them out and toss them on the floor. She says that she witnessed this. She was like 14 years old or something like that. Wouldn't give her last name, just said her name was Naira. And of course, Congress erupts with fury. The president cites it, half a dozen times. George H.W. Bush, the dad, cites this story in his remarks, demanding escalation of the conflict. We got to go get Saddam. We got to stop Iraq. We need more troops. We need to go in there. Well, it was a complete sham. Total lie. A total rumor of war. Naira was the daughter of, I'm trying to go off my memory, she was like the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. And she was coached by a media company that had been hired by the Kuwaiti embassy that spent $1 million on this media project trying to figure out how to encourage America to come to Kuwait's rescue and attack Iraq. And so they hatched this plan where the ambassador's daughter would be coached to lie publicly and mask her identity to deceive the American political establishment into demanding war. Worked super well. But it was an absolute rumor of war. It was something that was perceived as authoritative. It came from official sources. It was a story that passed from one person to the next. All these Webster criteria for rumor, check the box here. And this is just propaganda 101. So we can get into a lot of examples, but I'm going to keep this one brief. A couple final quotes. H.L. Mencken, I like this one. He says, "Wars are seldom caused by spontaneous hatreds between people. For people in general are too ignorant of one another to have grievances and too indifferent to what goes on beyond their borders to plan conquests. They must be urged to the slaughter by politicians who know how to alarm them." And then David O. McKay, he says, "Misrepresentation, false propaganda, innuendos soon sprout into poisonous weeds, and before long the people find themselves victims of a pollution that has robbed them of their individual liberty and enslaved them to a group of political gangsters." That quote deserves some applause. Propaganda sprouts, grows, and people lose their liberty and enslave them to a group of political gangsters. I thought that was great. It's so fascinating when you read the scriptures, especially the Book of Mormon, you see this pattern again and again. You see people stirred up to anger. I mean, just turn on social media. It is just stir up to anger 101. It is all that's going on is people are getting fired up, and the flames are being fanned, and people are being egged on in their positions to stoke this conflict between people with whom they disagree, right? You turn on the news, so-called news, with how partisan and toxic everything is, and everyone's being stirred up, and people's hearts are being hardened. Their minds are being blinded because so much of what is passed off as truth is utter crap. It's nonsense. It's spin. It's effort to shape an outcome without basing it off of truth. And it's fascinating too that especially when you look at the Book of Mormon, I've shared this story before, that all the wars between when King Mosiah steps down and now the people are in charge, and you got the rule of the judges, the year of the judges, and so forth. And so now the Nephites are kind of self-governing. They no longer have a monarchy system. And from that point on, all the way through Christ, there are, I think, 15 major war campaigns recorded in the Book of Mormon during this period of time. And in every single one of them, I mean, this is all of Alma, all the so-called war chapters that people struggle with. And they're like, why am I reading all of this? This is so tedious, all this war stuff. I believe that the reason why is because Christ himself said in Matthew, when we go back, before my coming, there will be wars and rumors of war. Nephi warned this about his posterity. He saw this in vision again and again. The scriptures talk about the future day in which there will be wars and rumors of wars. So here we're given the Book of Mormon, and we're giving this record of 15 major wars. And what do we see? What do we behold, like Nephi beheld? We behold the rumors of wars. Every single one of these 15 major war campaigns during this period of time, every single one, was instigated by a dissenter Nephite who wanted to stoke conflict by going to the Lamanites, using them as pawns, whipping them up, just like Amalickiah did. He was a dissenter Nephite, and stirring them up to anger to get them to go attack the Nephites, because these dissenting Nephites wanted power and control. So you have to ask yourself, if the Book of Mormon is written for our day, if Jesus said that this will happen in the future before he comes, that we'll be able to behold war and rumors of war, what does it look like today? What are these supposedly authoritative stories that we tell from one another, that we believe is true, that we pass on to others, that are all being concocted by people from in our midst? I mean, what did Jesus say? He says, you talk about wars, and this is in the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm going off the top of my head, but he says, you hear of wars in far off lands, but you know not the hearts of the men in your own land. So you kind of put two and two together, right? Here's Jesus saying, like, you're all speculating and talking about all this stuff in far off lands. You don't realize that there are people in your midst, in your lands. You don't know their hearts, and they are conspiring, like we read about in the scriptures, how they are like the friggin' Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military, who have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect Americans, literally conspiring, like in the most literal, actual sense, literally conspiring to kill Americans and to deceive them into going to war against the Cubans. I mean, this is exactly what is going on. It is people in our midst who desire power. They have these certain outcomes or goals, or, they wanted in that case to go invade Cuba. And so within our midst, they are deceiving us into thinking certain things happened, into believing a certain way, so that we then demand going to war. Because if you're going to believe, Hermann Goring, if you're going to believe H.L. Mencken, if you're going to believe, what's his name? Karl von Clausewitz, who wrote that Prussian military strategy book I talked about, all of them agree that people don't naturally want to go to war against one another. They hold no particular grievance. It's just that they are stirred up again and again to anger. And then there's an actual or perceived attack, a claimed attack. It might be a false flag event. Those are, of course, very common, where, like Operation Northwoods would have been, where it's a staged attack, all with it, or it's allowed to happen. I mean, Pearl Harbor was exactly that. FDR and administration had forewarning of the attack. They chose not to provide that intelligence to all the local military leaders so that they could be surprised and caught off guard and have this aggrieved status of victimhood that would allow Americans to go to war. FDR spent his whole campaign in the months leading up to that for re-election saying, we're not going to send your boys to war. We're not going to go to war. This is a European war. Let them fight it out, because the American public did not want to go to war again. They didn't want to send their boys again to die in far-off lands. The sentiment of the American public was not there. And FDR leaned into that and promised and said, we're not doing this. But he wanted to. He wanted a legacy. He wanted impact. He wanted to shape the world with Churchill and the rest. And so he allowed December 7th, 1941, the supposed day in infamy, to happen. Because it served his political ends. Because there was a goal that he desired. Became a rumor of war. So false flags are a common instance, right? It doesn't have to be an actual attack. Certainly if we are legitimately attacked in an unprovoked manner, that's going to stir up a desire among many for retaliation and vengeance, of course. And that's what these guys here are saying. Like, once there's an attack, then you get into this cycle of blowback where each side feels justified in attacking the other because they're each an aggrieved victim that has a basis with which to go fight the other. And so you got to light that spark, and blow things up, either with an actual attack or a purported attack. But this is happening in our day again and again. So if we are going to listen to Nephi about what he beheld, if we're going to listen to Jesus about what's going to happen before he comes again, we got to not just pay attention to and renounce war. We have to be extra sensitive and reject. We have to be extra sensitive to and reject rumors of war. We as Latter-day Saints need to be not just truth tellers, but truth knowers. We need to inoculate ourselves against the rumors of war, the propaganda in our day. And yet, when I look around, I don't really see that going on. When you look at, even just in modern history, look at post 9/11, everything, go to war, and all the polls showing how eager everyone was to be on team Mitt Romney and say, let's go. I mean, Mitt Romney, for his part, when he was a presidential candidate, literally advocated for preventive war, which is directly and explicitly prohibited as taught in the Book of Mormon. And yet here he is on stage saying, we ought to go where they are and kill them first before they kill us, right? Latter-day Saints, Christians, have become so disconnected from their doctrine on this issue and so swept up by the propaganda, unable to see through the lies, unable to see that it's the modern Amalekiahs who are literally preaching from their towers and pushing this propaganda, stirring up our hearts, hardening our hearts, blinding our minds, and stirring us up to anger. I think this is happening like never before. Technology facilitates this on a daily basis in the most minute fashion, the subtle opportunities, the things mentioned in songs and in movies and all the rest. We are living in a mind war. I've mentioned before, I'm working on a book by that title that I'll hopefully have out by next year. We are in a mind war where our children's minds, our own minds, are ground zero for the conflict. And too few people are wearing any armor. And they don't have any weaponry. They don't even know who the enemy is. Even if they had a weapon, they wouldn't know where to point and shoot or where to hold up a shield because they don't understand the nature of the enemy in this massive psyop. Right? Every time there's a war, psychological warfare always precedes it because you have to condition humans into killing one another. You have to make the enemy seem subhuman and less worthy. You can't humanize them at all. You can't have your soldiers knowing that they have wives and children and careers and aspirations and life goals. Like that humanizes it. Don't mention that they're children of God just like you, because then they won't go kill one another and be pawns in this global game of risk. So everything is about dehumanization. It's about stripping the divine character away from people, turning them into these automatons, right? Of aggression where, they're attacking us, so I need to attack them and get into that cycle. It's happening again and again. Latter-day Saints should be at the forefront of rejecting it, Christ here, 3 Nephi 11, explicitly saying that my doctrine is that such things should be done away with. And I don't think we're doing very well at doing that. I think so many in our faith fall prey to that. Again, 3 Nephi 11:30, this is not my doctrine to stir up the hearts of men with anger one against another, but this is my doctrine, that such things should be done away. How do you do away with it? I don't know that you can just ignore it and let everyone else be affected by it. To be done away with that almost implies a proactive effort to fight rumors of war, to fight propaganda, to preach truth amid clouds of darkness, to be, again, a truth knower, but then an advocate of truth, a truth teller, to do away with stirring up the hearts of men with anger, to do away with rumors of war. So what are you doing about it? What am I doing about it? What are we collectively as a church doing to reject, to do away with the modern rumors of war? I mean, Spencer W. Kimball, right? We're a warlike people, too quick to worship gods of stone and steel. When an enemy rises up, we become anti-enemy and call soldiers patriots and equip them with bombs and guns and missiles and call them a patriot, thus counterfeiting, Kimball said, the true meaning of patriot, according to Christ's terminology. We are too prone to worship gods of stone and steel. We seek the arm of flesh as our savior to keep us safe. We turn to Caesar instead of Christ. We put our faith in the arm of flesh for our deliverance. And the children of Israel did this again and again and again. They wanted a king like unto all the nations, and God was disappointed, but he told, Saul, go ahead and give it to him. And, and then he warned them all, they're going to enslave your kids, going to tax you, your lands, your crops, everything else. You're going to be enslaved. But okay, here you go. Here's a king. Again and again, we as followers of God degrade, we undermine, we don't pursue the opportunities that we're offered. And we fall prey to the same traps that beset all the peers, all the, Gentile folk all around us. And we want to be like them, and we want to fit in. We want to be in the world, but not of the world. And so we participate in their pageantry and their processes and their everything else. And we become Caesarian creatures who claim to believe in Christ, and yet Christ is saying to do away with rumors of wars, and we collectively as a church are just latching onto and believing every rumor of war that's touted by the government, touted by those in power with authority to start these stories and get people believing these rumors of war. I think we got a pretty poor track record. I think it's like the boy who cried wolf, again and again, except we're not putting a stop to it. We're continuing to believe the false reports about things. And we're not doing a very good job about resisting that, about calling it out, about encouraging others to avoid it. It's that quote, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Like, I should have learned my lesson. You're a fool. You're trying to fool me. You're a liar. I'm going to disbelieve you. And you look at the polling of how many people trust the media, and it's low. It's always low. And yet, new news reports come out, new claims are made, Ukraine did this, or Iran did that, or this happened in Libya, and people just believe these supposedly authoritative reports, and they spread them around, and people write blog posts and tweets and newscasts and podcasts and everything else, and these stories get passed around because they're supposedly authoritative. They're a report of a supposed fact, and the rumors kick in, the propaganda goes into overdrive. Those in power acquire more of it. Again, like Amalickiah, the point is to acquire power over your own people, to scare them into surrendering their freedom and seeing you as their savior and deliverer. That is the exact society that we're in today. That is where we have a critical failure, I believe, as a church community in being immune from this. I think there are too many of us who have had hardened hearts and blinded minds that have been stirred up to anger. Certainly has been the case in my lifetime with all the post 9/11 stuff especially, but through COVID and I'm sure through future events, we're going to see the same pattern playing out. So what does that mean for you and me in conclusion? He who has been warned has to warn his neighbor. If you understand these things, if you believe these things, we gotta let this be the rumor that we spread. This has to be the story that we tell. We gotta help people understand that the propaganda is out there. We need to empower people to find alternatives. How do you find truth? How do you cling to truth? How do you recognize deceptions when they're happening? How can you become more of a critical thinker? How can you become more skeptical of authority and have an initial position of disbelieving authority, right? Reagan said to trust but verify. And I think we need to first distrust and then verify and then believe if your sources check out and something's actually true. We are in a mind war. We're supposed to have a shield and body armor and a weapon to fight back, to do away with these things. We got to know who the enemy is, and too few of us do. Scriptures are full of examples. We know ultimately who the enemy is. We read some scriptures about that here, right? It's ultimately Christ versus Caesar. It is the consummate battle, and we got to pick a side because no man can serve two masters. See you next Sunday.